Shifting alliances in Syria, Kurdish fighters backed by the US say the Syrian armies to help them face Turkish troops. The border area now an increasingly dangerous jigsaw fought over by groups who want different outcomes. Where's Russia in all this? And what's next for war-torn Syria? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm Peter Dobby. Welcome to the programme. After 7 years of war, the complex mosaic that is the battlefield in Syria can still surprise. The US, Russia, Iran, Turkey, a myriad of rebel groups and, of course, the Syrian regime are all involved, and they all want to second-guess where the conflict is heading next. It's northern Syria where their attention is now focused, because it's there that we may be seeing a new front. The Kurds aligning themselves with the regime, ready to take on Turkish forces. Game changer? Last month, Turkey launched an offensive to seize the Syrian city of Afrin from the Kurdish fighters of the YPG, a group it considers terrorists and a threat to its border. But the YPG helped the US in the fight against ISIL, further straining US relations with Ankara. And now Turkey faces a new enemy, pro-Syrian government troops. The Kurds say they've done a deal with Syria to join forces to fight Turkey. Syrian pro-government troops and their involvement, well, that was announced by Syrian state TV on Monday.
Following the Turkish attacks on our families in Afrin, and following the request of Afrin citizens from the regime to protect them from the ongoing Turkish aggression that led to so many killings and destruction, it has been declared now that popular troops will enter Afrin within hours.
Crucially, how did Turkey receive that news? Here's the Turkish foreign minister.
If the regime is entering there to cleanse the PKK and PYD, then there are no problems. However, if they come in to defend the YPG, then nothing and nobody can stop us. This applies to Afrin as well as Manbij and to the east of the Euphrates River.
Well, Afrin is part of northern Syria and has an extremely complex mix of alliances with several regional and international players all involved. Last month, the US-led coalition announced it was intending to build a border security force in northern Syria. It would consist of 30,000 mostly Kurdish fighters who've been helping in the battle to get rid of ISIL. But that strained US relations with Turkey, of course, a key NATO ally. Turkey launched an offensive to secure its border and clear Afrin of the YPG, the Kurdish fighters it considers to be terrorists. Ankara says the group's an offshoot of the PKK, that's the Kurdistan Workers' Party, with which Turkey's been in conflict for 3 decades. Russia controls the airspace over Afrin, but ahead of the Turkish operation, it withdrew hundreds of its soldiers from near the city. Kurdish fighters held Afrin 6 years ago after the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad's soldiers, left northern Syria. Let's go to our guests now. Joining us from Istanbul, Mehmet Yegin, an affiliate of the Political Science Department at the University of Bilkent in Berlin, Salah Muslim, member of the Diplomatic Committee of TEV-DEM, the Movement for a Democratic Society. That's an alliance bringing Kurds together in northern Syria. And joining us from Arezzo in Italy on Skype is Joshua Landis, director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Welcome to you all. Joshua, coming to you first. Who's going to end up fighting whom here?
I don't think that this is designed to avoid fighting, and it should be a win-win for everybody, because Turkey gets to stop its invasion. Over 20 Turkish soldiers have been killed so far. Syria gets to reassert its sovereignty, and the Kurds don't get killed. There have been about 1,000 YPG, that's the militia of the Kurds, killed so far by Turkish forces. So it would stop, in theory, the Turkish invasion. Syria would disarm the Kurdish troops there and have them stand down. So Turkey would win by getting rid of the YPG. Syria wins territory, and the Kurds get to fight another day.
Mehmet Yegin in Istanbul, is that an interpretation that is perceived in the highest office in the land with the president, with Mr. Erdogan?
Well, pretty much, I think, because in the beginning, we remember that Turkish armed forces declared that Turkey is and has a respect for Syrian territorial integrity, and it's for self-defense. And here we see that the regime forces are getting into Afrin, which is pretty much in line with the territorial integrity of Syria. Here, I think that the most important thing is that whether the Russians and Syrian regime, of course, will provide the necessary security guarantees to Turkey about the position of YPG in Afrin. I think that this is the critical part. If Turkey and the regime makes a deal, a similar one to the U.S. in Manbij and east of Euphrates, then I think that will not be turned to be a crisis. But if it does not achieve in this period, then the conflict may continue and it may escalate to one that is beyond Turkey as well, between the U.S. and Russia, which is the worst case scenario, of course.
We'll come on to the whole debate surrounding the Euphrates later on in our discussion, because that speaks to the part of the discussion where we have to talk about the idea of partition, or whether Syria will ultimately end up being the subject of partition. Salah Muslim in Berlin, in your mind, who was it that brokered this deal? Who put it together?
First of all, I would like to say that the Democratic Syrian forces, which they are defending Afrin now, they are the children of Afrin. They are YPG. They organize themselves and defending their families in villages. And of course, I mean, the invasion of Turkey trying to occupy the place of Afrin, as they have occupied Shahba areas, Al-Bab and Jarablus and Azaz. So this is a part of it. We, as Syrian components, I mean the Arabs, the Kurds, all together, we are defending Afrin, and we consider this invasion and this occupation attempt as a continuation of the fighting was going in Raqqa, in Deir ez-Zor, is a kind of relief of the fighting going in Deir ez-Zor, supporting Daesh.
I just want to jump in there with one particular point. Nobody is trying to decry or criticize or lessen the fight that the Kurdish fighters fought against ISIL. And of course, it's maybe worth noting at this point in our conversation that the Syrian regime forces have never gone head-to-head with ISIL. Your fight with Turkey predates by almost 25 years the fight against Syria. So why the about face here? Is this really just a case of my enemy's enemy is my friend?
We are not a threat for Turkey at all. I mean, we are part of the Syrian people, and we are looking for the solution in Syria, a democratic solution for everybody, and Turkey is trying to obstacle this way, I mean, this approach from the beginning. I mean, they are trying to change according to their plan, because they are refusing even the democratic rights for all the people of Syria and democratic solution for Syria. And now for the Syrian, I mean, what we are looking for is just for the Syrian government to protect the sovereignty of Syria. I mean, that's all. We are not going to return back to the old fascist regime as it was before. I mean, depressing and dictatorship. We are looking for the solution. And now all we are, I mean, a dialogue with government forces is just to protect the sovereignty of the Syrian territory.
Joshua Landis, do you buy that this is no more than a dialogue, and if that dialogue actually has inbuilt guarantees, it may actually succeed?
Yes, I agree with that. I'd like to correct one thing you said, which is that the Syrian regime has not gone head-to-head with ISIS. Of course, the Syrian regime has fought ISIS for a long time and took half the territory. The Kurds took one half of the territory with the help of the United States, and the Syrian army took the other half with the help of Iran. So there's been a long war going on between the Syrian government and ISIS. But to your question of Afrin, there is still some disagreement between the Syrian government and the Kurds. The Kurds have been emphatic that they've made a military agreement, but they say a political and administrative agreement has not been struck, that they will discuss those questions later. Syria, of course, is insisting that it be restored to full administrative authority in Afrin. And so there are clearly tensions between the Kurds and the Syrian government, which is why it's taken a month into this invasion to come to an agreement. The Syrian government and the Kurds were talking before the invasion. The Kurds did not want to concede total sovereignty to the Syrian government, and still haven't officially. So there's going to be some toing and froing yet.
Mehmoud Yer in Istanbul. If Afrin and Manbij were to fall to the Turkish-led / Turkish-backed forces, that would mean that there would be a whole stretch of about 200 kilometers that would be, as far as the Syrian regime's concerned, dangerously close to that area of partition, or the potential consequence of partition that you hinted at earlier. If that's the case, is that something that Ankara wants to get to, or is it happy to stay within this idea of border integrity as it stands at the moment?
Well, I think that the latter is true for Turkey, because it is important to see that Syrian regime, Syria as a country has the territorial integrity and has the security of its borders, which is the Turkish borders as well. But it needs a ground bargain. It needs a ground negotiation on the table to make such agreements between the parties. So far, it has not achieved. But if it's achieved, I don't think that Turkey will object to that, and I don't think that Turkey will be the party that is spoiling that is not letting that happen. So that's my point of view on that.
Salah Muslim, the Kurds have established, 3 cantons here. Arguably, they are powerful. They can sustain that. Is part of the game plan for the Kurds here, particularly if we talk about Afrin and then Manbij, to make sure that the Turkish forces, if the Kurds are fighting alongside the Syrian regime forces, is the game plan here to make sure the Turkish forces get bogged down, almost literally, on the ground in this quite small, localized but combustible conflict?
Well, from the beginning, there are many points, it should be mentioned. One of them, we never been a threat for Turkey. We never threatened Turkey at all from the beginning. And there was Daesh in all these areas. And Turkey never done anything. It just supported Daesh and those mercenaries, and they supported those extremists from the beginning, and still everybody knows, still supporting them. And even this war in Afrin is a kind of supporting those groups. This is known by everybody. This is one point. And the other point, we still consider ourselves, we are part of Syria. We have a project for all democratic Syria. And from the beginning, when the Geneva talks started, and even for Sochi and even for the Asitana, Turkey is obstacling us to join, preventing us to join any of these efforts, for the political solution. And we have a model for Syria already. It's not only the Kurdish problem, because we have the Kurds, the Arabs, the Syrians. All together, we have established system, and this system is a hope for future Syria. It could be an example. It's very democratic. We have institutions, we have everything, and also we are protecting ourselves. We said we are part of Syria, so if any agreements should be, it could be a final for the political solution for Syria, and we've never been a threat for Turkey. They know that very well. I mean, it's just excuse. I mean, because they are trying to prevent any democratic rights for the Kurdish people and for the other components, for Syrians, for example, for the other minorities in the areas, for the Arabs, which the system we have established. So the aim is not the Kurdish, it's not the Kurdish threat. This Turkey, they have Kurdophobia, but it's not right. We never been a threat for Turkey.
And nobody, just to interrupt you there, Salah Muslim, nobody involved in this, either inside the country or outside the country, is particularly on board when it comes to a political solution for the Kurds. That's a different discussion. Joshua Landis, where are the Russians in all this? It occurs to me that they're not particularly wedded to their loyalty to Damascus, but equally they're not wedded to this quite good relationship that Mr. Putin seems to have with Mr. Erdogan, despite the fact that, almost 2 and a bit years ago, the Turks shot a Russian fighter aircraft out the skies. The relationship took a nosedive, but then it came back up again.
Yes, it has. And Russia is very much at the center of these negotiations, undoubtedly, because Erdogan will not speak to the Syrian regime. Russia has been the interlocutor here and has been trying to preserve good relations with the Kurds, with the Turks, and with Assad, which of course is very difficult to do. But this is very favorable for Russia because it means that Turkey doesn't step in to Syria, that Assad, its client, in a sense, in this whole thing, gets to reassert his authority. The United States is less likely to be totally happy with this deal. We just saw the NSC head, McMaster, say, now is the time to push back against Iran. But the United States is weighing. They want to help the Kurds. They want to stabilize Syria on the one hand, but on the other hand, they want to roll back Iran and help to drive Iran out of Syria. That's their stated goal. And this, of course, by spreading the authority of the Syrian state, helps to reassert both Russian and Iranian authority over more Syrian territory. And that will, of course, upset many in Washington, D.C.
Mehmet Yegin in Istanbul. Kurdish dreams of federalism, we've just heard them, they're being articulated by Salah Muslim in Berlin, cannot surely coexist with what you might call Turkish dreams of a terrorist-free state just across the border in Syria.
Well, first, I have to say that there are false allegations made by Mr. Muslim about Turkey, and a Kurdophobia is a harsh word that I have to react, because he was himself in the beginning of the problem. He was getting to Ankara, coming and going back, and there was not a Kurdophobia then. And also, we have to remind that there is this opening of a corridor for Kobani by Turkey of the Peshmerga against ISIS. So here I think we have to just notice those issues at first. I don't think that Turkey has any problems about Kurds having their rights, their cultural rights, their position in Syria. But Turkey has problems about the connections of PYD and YPG with PKK, because these connections are bringing the problems of the weapons that are getting into hands of the PKK against Turkey, the training in Syria that may get into hands of PKK against Turkey, and of course using the territories that are held by YPG as a base against Turkey. These are the concerns of Turkey. But in the beginning, if he can remember that Turkey always supported the rights of Kurdish people in Syria, and also Turkey in the beginning said that this a federal structure that provides a position for Kurdish people in Syria is also applicable if the YPG is not cooperating with PKK, and PKK is laying down weapons against Turkey. So we got to think about this first, and then talk about what should be in Syria or not. If these conditions are provided, then I don't think Turkey has any problems, because look at Turkey's relations with KDP in Iraq. There is no problem about that. There's no problem about having
Okay, Mehmet, I'm going to stop you there because we are getting rather bogged down. We're getting rather bogged down now in the nomenclature of this. So let's just simplify it, and let's just take a minute to allow Salah Muslim a right of reply there. Salah Muslim in Berlin, will you restate for us now that there is no political or military link-up between the YPG and the PKK?
We stated from the beginning, we have no relation with anybody. We are just thinking of Syria, and there is no PKK in Syria, in Afrin. The people are defending in Afrin. They are just the sons and daughters of Afrin. They organize themselves to protect their villages, and since 5 years, they are defending Afrin against all these brutals. And recently, Turkey attacked them. Yes, Turkey was trying to make some tricks for us, I mean, to pull us to somewhere, but they were supporting Daesh. And in Kobani, which your guest was talking about, in Kobani, also they were openly supporting Daesh against the Kurdish people. And now they are trying to take revenge of Daesh because Daesh was defeated in Kobani and Raqqa, and they are making some kind of relief because the fighting against Daesh is still continuing in Deir ez-Zor in the other places.
Okay.
So this
Joshua
is
Landis,
the fight
there in Italy.
Has
this always been, looking at the situation in Afrin and then moving east towards Manbij, has this always been fertile ground for a flip or for an allegiance within Turkey between within Syria, between the regime and the Kurds, because Turkey has constantly and continually been annoyed at the United States over its attitude towards the SDF?
Yes, it has. So this is clearly the sort of deal that Russians have been nosing forward for. They're looking to find an understanding between Turkey and Assad, whereby Assad would reimpose authority over his borders, build up his military enough so that he can control the borders and provide security to Turkey in exchange for Erdogan reversing his statement that Assad has to go and supporting the Free Syrian Army and other Syrian militias that have been fighting against Assad. That's what Russia is trying to do. Of course, the United States wants to remain in northern Syria, and they're going to become a sticking point eventually in this, because the United States has, in a sense, sided with Kurdish nationalism in order to build up the Kurds, to gain leverage, and to try to get rid of Iranian influence and to get rid of Assad. And so in that sense, this has been... In this sense, the United States is not going to want to continue this kind of deal that Assad has struck with the Kurds in the eastern part of Syria. And the Kurds, too, are very reluctant to let go of the United States. The United States is the only force that's guaranteeing them a level of autonomy that they have not had previously.
Okay, I want to ask one very brief question to both Salah Muslim and Mehmet Yegin. Salah Muslim first. Just answer me this in about 30 seconds, please, because we are almost out of time. How long can this common interest last between the Syrian regime and the Kurds of Syria?
Now what we are asking the regime, is just to protect the sovereignty of the Syrian. If they are Syrian, we are part of Syria. We never tried to divide Syria, and we are not trying to establish something else. All we want is democratic Syria, but the Syrian government is not doing their duties, their mission to protect the Syrian territory. We never thought of dividing Syria or we are anything else. So what we are doing, in Afrin and the other places, we have been attacked in our homes, so we are defending ourselves. It's just self-defense, it's nothing else. And we will never return to the Ba'athist regime as it was before 2011.
Gentlemen, we will have to leave it there. Thank you to all our guests today, Mehmet Yegin, Salah Muslim, Mohammed and Joshua Landis, and thank you to you too for your company.